So, Steve, we're sat in your lovely garden towards the end of your residency with Fabrica, Silver Nights, and we're just going to have a chat about how it's gone to give the blog viewers a bit more of a sense of the ideas that the residency's come out of and what you've been kind of learning through the residency. So I'm going to just ask a few prompt questions, which you can respond to in any way that you want to.
Yeah.
So your residency is taking place alongside the Forked Forest Path, which is an exhibition by Olafur Eliasson, which is at Fabrica at the moment. And one of the reasons that you're doing the residency is because whenever we're showing an old work, and this is an old work, I always love to work with artists through a kind of live residency process. And the artists that we choose to work with for these residencies, that it's not about interpreting the exhibition in any way, but it is about using the exhibition as a kind of nest for the artists in residence kind of ideas and kind of interests. So maybe it's really good to start off with you just talking about how you see the relationship between what you're doing in the residency and the exhibition.
Sure. I mean, I was so excited when you approached me about this because, like, many other people, I saw Olafur's weather project installation at the Turbine Hall and took the family, and we just had such a great time. It was amazing atmosphere. And then I went to see his retrospective. Was it Hayward Retrospective, like 2 years ago?
I think it was in real life at the Tate. It was a big.
It was at the Tate.
Yeah.
You're right. It was at the Tate. And the fog rooms and the mist that was backlit with all the rainbows coming through the mist and I suppose there's an affinity there that I think Olafur really loves natural physics as part of his work, or there's a scientific underpinning to it, but a great sort of sensitivity and playfulness as well. So if you're going to pick any artist for me to get excited about, this was the one. Yeah, definitely.
Great. Your residency stems from your very early interest in night walking. I understand you've been night walking as a teenager onwards. So what is it that you love about being outdoors at night?
It's funny how it started. I guess I was 15 and I was waiting to get my O-level results, and that horrible kind of wait when you can't do anything about your destiny and it's just there. And I just found it. I just got this idea one night. Well, I think I'm just going to go for a walk and kind of walk it off and go through the woods down to the churchyard. And I absolutely loved it. And at the same time, I was just becoming an artist. I was doing watercolours in the landscape and that kind of thing. But there was something about night that was a bit more vivid to me, and it stuck, I guess.
I'd like you to say some more about that.
Yeah. Well, there's a wonderful book, one of my favourites, called Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds, and it's written at the time of Isaac Newton in France, and I suppose it's the first sort of popular science book. And in the story, the woman who's a marchioness, she has this, chateau and a fantastic garden, and there's a man who visits, who's an astronomer, and and I think it's like a dinner party setting, and they're actually the two. They've got something interesting to say to each other, and they go. And there probably is a slight romantic undertone, but it's not a bodice ripper or anything like that. And they just start looking at the night sky and talking about it. And she says that she almost feels like reproaching the sun for hiding the stars from her. And I love that, that we kind of suffer a lot from a diurnal bias in our lives, and it's a cultural bias as much as a practical one. Almost all science is a little bit wonky because of diurnal bias, and it's a little bit wonky because of gender bias, but our cultural bias, that we are told that darkness is bad and something's going to come out and bite us, and it's a primeval fear, but politicians play on it and priests play on it, and actually to such an extent that we avoid darkness at all costs. We just blast it away with light, and we've forgotten how beautiful darkness is, and that, you know, that especially outside at night. And you know, I find that a very opening out experience, and I think it's because there's a lot of physical stuff going on that changes at night. So in the day, we've got colour reception in our eyes, our cones, you know, red, green and blue, but they're also located in the fovea, so the detail sensing part of the eye. So we tend to be focused in a lot on the things we're doing, the skills or the reading and writing or looking at our smartphones. Whereas at night, when you're using the rods in your eyes that are just light and dark and not colour and not detail, they're spread right across the retina, so that it's a bit like putting a wide angle lens on a camera, that your perception widens out. But also because you're slightly nervous, your hearing ramps up and you notice the smells and your touch ramps up. So all your senses ramp up, but your attention is out there. It's not inward, it's an outward attention. And if you have a clear night and you can see the stars, you know, suddenly the dome of the sky that sort of holds the earth as a sort of contained vessel has gone, and you can see right out into space and time. And again, I just find that a very liberating and exciting, you know, and comforting experience. It's, you know, when you're upset by something, it's tremendously comforting.
I think you've really beautifully described this whole other half of the clock that most of us just never really experience. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it's a tragedy that I think there was a report on the national parks or some sort of big report. I can't remember what it was called, and they talked about this ambition that every child should experience the Milky Way at some point in their school years, and that should be a national ambition. And actually, I think that's right, because if you don't know it, how can you love it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Your residency seems to meld really quite different kind of interests. This love of nature, which you clearly have and is very evident in your work, a lot of your work. This kind of the science and kind of research aspect, which sort of seems to underpin your artistic practice, but also particularly this campaigning work that you've that seems to have become more prevalent in recent years for darker skies, so against light pollution. Could you sort of talk about each of those, and
Sure.
and also just how they kind of all work together for you?
Yes.
Because they seem very to meld, as I've said, very naturally.
So when I was at school, I did physics, biology and art, and I loved that combination. I loved, I had a brilliant physics teacher and a brilliant biology teacher and a terrible art teacher, but a wonderful environment, an inspiring environment, and upset a lot of people, caused a lot of problems by insisting on doing those 3 A levels together, because you were either arts or science, you know, how it used to be. And there's something about physics I love that elegance that physics tries to do of reducing things down to a simple mathematical equation that can describe a phenomenon in a predictable way, and you can measure it, use that equation again and again, and predict how things are going to go. And you know, that the whole, you know, Einstein and Isaac Newton and you know, everybody since is trying, you know, Stephen Hawking, the theory of everything sort of idea of physics. I like that, but I love it when it's muzzed up by biology with all the messy, gooey stuff, and the, you know, the other aspects to the real world that make it sort of more complicated. So the campaigning is a really new thing for me. It's only been going on about a year, and just over a year now. And what led to it is 2 years ago I'd been out photographing a lunar eclipse out of the Long Man of Wilmington, and while the camera was clicking away for a couple of hours and I was freezing cold, I had the time to notice where the big splashes of light were in the South Downs National Park, which has dark sky status. And there's one that was a bit, I could work out Newhaven Harbour. Well, yes, there's a port there, that made sense, and the Rampion Wind Farm I could see, and Eastbourne and Seaford. And I could see Brighton, and then there was another big light next to Brighton, and I kind of checked on the alignment on the maps and realised it was the sports stadium at Falmer. And as I drove back, sure enough, there it was, this massive bright light that I hadn't really noticed on my way out there. And I kind of grumbled and didn't do anything about it for a year. And then the following year I was working on a big project at RSPB Pulborough Brooks, and researching a list of species to respond to in my artworks there. And when I was reading about the invertebrates, this insect apocalypse that you've probably heard about is going on, and the reasons for it are mainly agricultural poisons that are really a legacy of the Second World War. So the fertilizers come from explosives, and the pesticides tend to come from actually poison gas. The thing that they used to commit genocide, we're spraying all over our countryside, or something that's evolved from that.
Yeah.
So that was really terrifying. But then there was this whole link came out to light pollution. A big paper, a big kind of research review called Owens et al. 2019, and it looked at about 150 scientific papers that gave evidence for what was happening with insects and light, and how artificial light was really killing a lot. I mean, like huge numbers, and that if the insect decline carries on at that rate, we've had it. So that's what got me starting with my campaign about initially the football ground, but I've kind of widened out my thinking a little bit from that now. But it's, nobody was saying anything, and I thought, well, I've got to say something. So I did. and it kind of took off, and I'm okay, I better go with it then.
Yeah. And are there any other, are there any specific groups that you're part of that are part of that campaign? Who are the
I think probably the most active group is the Campaign for Rural England. They are not afraid to criticise and stir it up, and they're very passionate, very genuine about what they do. The trouble is some people and some organisations can't speak, or feel they can't speak very freely, so the National Park is quite cautious and hadn't really been speaking out against the football ground because of, for basically probably political reasons as much as anything, or organisational fear or whatever. Same with Brighton and Hove City Council. They've done nothing, been completely ineffectual on what, it's an environmental health matter. No action. It's not just Brighton, no council in the UK has taken any action on light pollution really. So then there's the International Dark Skies Association, who are great and have a fantastic amount of resources about how to do community-friendly lighting, how to not mess up the night sky, how to get the safety and the practical requirements without really messing everything up. So they're really good. But the exciting thing was the establishment of this all-party parliamentary group for dark skies. And that's a big new thing, and all credit to Andrew Griffiths MP for getting the ball rolling on that, because it's a really important thing. And I've got to be honest, the majority of MPs at Westminster have no idea about the science of what's going wrong with light, and no idea about how relatively easy it is to fix either. I mean, if we want to deal with CO2 and climate change, this is the low-hanging fruit here. We can really deal with this. But unfortunately, particularly on the left, I mean, I've always been a left-wing minded person. I'm very disappointed that the left haven't engaged with it yet. They don't really understand that actually the impact is heaviest on the poorer communities. Particularly the human health impacts are really bad.
I remember a few years ago there was there was a lot of emphasis on kind of noise pollution and how damaging noise or unwanted noise can be to health, and I think that's kind of shifted up the noise as an annoyance.
Yes.
A detrimental thing in people's sort of minds, and I guess light pollution needs to be on a par with that, really.
And it's it's not enough. I mean, the great thing about the APPG is they ran a consultation and invited anybody to submit to it. So although I'm not a member of the APPG, I did do quite a weighty submission. So I commissioned lawyers lead aid to help me. And I'd originally contacted them thinking I might do a judicial review on the council not taking action on the football ground. And that looked like we had about a 65% chance of winning that. But that was a big risk of a lot of money, because even there was a convention called the Aarhus Convention that limits your exposure to the other side's costs of £50,000, but it doesn't limit your exposure to your own costs.
Okay, yes.
So I kind of, we talked about it, and I just said, I'm really sorry, I'd love to, but I can't. I can't risk the family home. Absolutely not. So I then said to them, well, look, we've started talking about this, and you've started researching it. Could you please write me some advice? So this was back in March last year when the lockdown was just starting. And I said, can you please write me a piece that says what is wrong with the law now, why isn't it working, and what changes could easily be made that would make it work. And so this is Lead A is the legal firm, and the QC is Andrew Parkinson. And he just wrote this fantastically, beautifully crafted advice, absolutely so accurate and on the money, and just 3 or 4 simple changes to the legal framework would make an enormous difference. So and again, I'm so grateful to the all-party parliamentary group, because that has been incorporated into the 10 policy proposals. So all we need now is the next stage of pushing the policy proposals into actual policies and then action. So we're still a few years away from the solution, but we're hopefully heading in the right direction.
Oh, great. I mean, it must be very frustrating as a maker, as a designer, as an artist, to know that so many of these solutions are just technical. And why wouldn't you want to? Why wouldn't you want to make the world better?
I think it's coming, and our own streetlights have improved. I can tell from the paper. So I'm writing this science paper using remote sensing to measure the light pollution and actually quantify where the big problems are and how bad they are relative to everything else. And one of the sort of aspects of that, so I've been really fantastically helped by Professor Chris Kyber in Potsdam, who's like a world authority on light pollution, which is brilliant, and has shown me how to access the data and how to handle it, to make good measurements. And our road, for example, you can see that the light levels are falling off because the street lighting is improving. So that's a good news story, but all the other sources of light are getting worse, but also we're building over more of the land area. So although the street lights themselves are getting better, we're having more of them. So that is a problem. But the bigger problems are things like greenhouses, sports clubs, car parks, advertising, all those sorts of things. And so I think, yes, the solution is, the practical aspect of the solution is technical, but a big part of the solution is people wanting it. You've got to persuade people that it's worth saving the night skies and worth having darkness when they go to sleep for themselves.
Great. Okay, we've slightly covered some of this ground, but I'm going to ask it again because something else might come up. So, your activism about light pollution has led you into some interesting research relationships.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, about what you've been up to?
So, right, great. Really specifically, so when I was running my campaign, I reached out to Professor Chris Kyber in Potsdam, who's at the Federal Geoscience Institute there, and asked him, because I could see the research that he was doing. I was looking at his papers, and I just said, I literally emailed him and said, could we have a chat? And so we had a chat, fantastic chat, and he said, well, Steve, why don't you write a paper? I'll help you. And I just went, yes! So I'm really excited that later this year we'll be publishing. We're just at the stage where we're almost ready to submit for peer review, and then there's I think it's a 3-month turnaround or something, and might have to change a few bits, and then we'll publish it. And it'll probably cause a bit of a storm when it goes out, because the figures are terrifying. But we work with the visual infrared imaging radiometry suite, which looks a bit like a cardboard box covered in tin foil. But it's up there in space.
Oh, wow.
And you can't hide from it. It's on the Suomi satellite, and it's one of the Earth sensing systems. And you in the winter months you can get pretty good measurements. In the summer months at our latitude you can't, because it doesn't get dark enough for the length of the overpass. In fact, right now we're doing these night walks. We don't actually have night at the moment. Quite,
Yes.
We're nearly night. So the beautiful thing about that is you can't hide. And in doing that research, interesting things are popping up, because of course I'm looking all over the UK and Europe, and I'm seeing a splash of light, and I'm going, that shouldn't be there. What's that? And you can zoom in, and with quite good resolution satellite images now, and I can see, oh. Well, what that is an old Second World War airbase with thousands of cars parked on it and security lights.
Wow.
So there's a whole other seam of light pollution that's emerging, because there's all these unsold cars and they have to put them somewhere, and they're putting them on all the old World War II air bases, and then of course they have to have security, and for a lot of people what security means is big old lights shining. So that's, I'm finding things. Another thing, and what's this? Oh, it's the nuclear power station in Somerset being built. It's this huge splash of light there.
Wow.
Oil rigs are
Yeah.
terrible. That'll go. That's great. The North Sea is, but it's interesting relating the things to relate the physics of the light emissions back to biological problems, so the insects. But also I'm interested in bird migrations, and a lot of those happen at night. And there was a real problem with the 9/11 memorial in New York, was causing lots of problems with that. And actually everybody got together and did some research, and although initially the ornithologists and naturalists ruffled a few feathers by bringing it up, actually everybody thought about, well, what can we do to make it less harmful? And they've changed how often they do it and how they do it, and working together, which is brilliant. So one of the problems here is a lot of our birds fly in from Eastern Europe, and when they come from the east to the west, they often do it at night, and they have a magnetic sensing system in their eyes. They can see the Earth's magnetic field, which is amazing. Cryptochromes in the eyes have a little quantum compass, and we don't know what that looks like, but we have a rough idea, and it's a bit like having tinted glasses but with a shape in it that's not tinted and the rest of it is tinted. So you can imagine, if you're a young starling that's not done the route before from Poland to Brighton, or whatever the route is, you flying across and then you hit Holland, you hit the Netherlands, and the whole of the French coast, the Belgian coast and the Netherlands is the worst light pollution going, but particularly Rotterdam has got a huge blob of light pollution. I mean, we are, when I talk to the ornithologists about this, they go, oh, I don't think that would really affect it. And then you tell them how bright it is and show them, and they go, oh, yeah, that could be a problem. So just to give a comparison, a football stadium with their grow lights, and they use these Hortolux 1,000-watt lights, that'll use about 1,000 light bulbs. So 1,000 times, that's 1,000,000 watts of light coming out of each football pitch in the Premier League around the UK.
Goodness.
So Planet Earth greenhouse, so if a football stadium has 1,000 of these and 1,000,000 watts, Planet Earth has at least 40,000 of them.
Wow.
And then Rotterdam is like Planet Earth many times over. I mean, this is like, if you think about a football stadium as a volcano of light, Planet Earth is like a whole collection of volcanoes all going off at once. Rotterdam is like the end of the world. It's just ridiculous.
So is it greenhouses in Rotterdam? Is it
Yes,
the port?
and it's exactly the same type of light bulb.
Right.
The high pressure sodium 1,000-watt, and they use it for growing, the green peppers. When you buy veg at the supermarket and you look at the packaging, and often it'll say Netherlands, and it'll have been, if it's winter months, it'll have been grown under these same lights they use to grow dope.
Yeah.
You know.
I wouldn't know about that, Steve.
But it's just no, I wouldn't either. It makes me sleepy. But you know, you can imagine if you're a sensitive young bird trying to make it across a continent, and the only way you can navigate, because it's at night, is your cryptochrome system in the eyes with this just faint blob of light that you're following, and then you hit this wall of light pollution. I would have thought, I mean, there's no research being done on it yet, but to me, I think that's a problem, likely, and it needs to be looked at.
Well, I'm really glad you're doing it. It needs somebody to do it, doesn't it?
It just, yeah, and we need to, I mean, all you got to do is put a lid on it, you know,
yeah.
just some tin foil.
Yeah. Well, it's just about factoring that in, isn't it, into the design of all these industrial buildings, effectively. Yeah. So, coming away from the science, back into you being an artist and dealing with kind of the philosophical or kind of experiential side of life. You've organised 4 kind of activities alongside your residency, 4 night walks out into Stanmore Woods. Could you just talk a little bit about what happens on those night walks?
Sure.
And what you think people are getting from it?
I think, you know, a key word is reverie for me as an artist. That it's a bit like dreaming, but there's conscious intent there, and it, you know, so it's more directed. So there's some access to your subconscious, but there's imaginative freedom, and I think being outside at night encourages a stronger form of reverie, because everything around you is slightly less fixed and more fluid and blurry at the margins, and what is it over there? And your brain is operating in a different, more speculative way. So I think for an artist, that's a really great thing. I happen to think it's really great for a scientist as well. You know? So when we were out there, part of it is just standing quietly and hearing everything going on around you and letting your mind wander a little bit. But there's a great phrase in neuroscience. Sorry, use the S word. Epistemic foraging. So it is that sort of curiosity, and I think artists are very, very curious people, and that's where they're so similar to scientists, because you know, it's like a dog with a bone. You see an idea and you start chasing it. So there's a lot of that sort of goes on, but there's also just that gentle, slightly more passive, sensory thing, allowing things to happen. You know, that I think artists are very good at knowing when to step back and let the medium or whatever it is, let it speak a bit to them. So I think there's an element of that people experienced as well.
I mean, I'll confess that I was on one of the night walks that you've done, and it was a really beautiful experience, actually. I think very, very aware of different senses at play, and also a strange sense of freedom, you know, that all this is there with no one in it.
Yes.
Because it's dark.
Yes.
And that was a really lovely thing, but it was also a very lovely thing to do with a small group of other people as well. And maybe I would have felt a bit more frightened if I'd been on my own, or certainly on guard.
Yeah, somebody asked me if when we were walking, somebody asked me if I'd ever had a fright. I think you asked me if I'd ever got into trouble or difficulty when I was out night walking, and there was that one time in Cornwall, and I did nearly get myself stranded by the tide. Well, not that nearly. I just got to the point where I didn't know exactly where I was, which is a dangerous thing to do in the dark on a beach in Cornwall. But I got myself out of it quite quickly. I kind of regrouped mentally and worked out where I was. But I did have about 5 minutes of like, oh shit, you've really screwed up this time, Steve.
Yeah, but it was great. I mean, often things are amazingly wonderful when you just shift things ever so slightly. You see the world anew.
It's very nice to do it for a change, to do it in company, because sometimes it's like when I'm editing a film, and I might spend weeks making this film and editing it, and I think I've got it sort of working. And then if I get somebody to come in and just say what they think about it, they don't even have to open their mouths. It's just the fact that they're sat next to me and I'm experiencing it again with them sat there. I look at it in a totally different way. That's really interesting. And you know, I will go on to ask them what they think, but just by having them there, I've kind of stopped seeing it through my eyes and started trying to imagine what it's like through their eyes, which actually that's what an editor needs to be. He's got to be able to be in the audience. You know.
So have you experienced the night differently because you've been in a group?
Yes, completely
great.
differently. Yeah, it's much more conversational.
Yes.
Yeah, it's much more like, it's like being in a pub without a ceiling and not much beer.
Well, I think one of the things I was surprised at on the night walks with how the dark created a kind of intimacy. I mean, I know we were all on a bit of an adventure, and you build a community by having an external threat, and I suppose we were all not used to it. So you were our leader. You were the confident leader who knew the site, and we were all
straight off ahead.
But there was a real sense of intimacy. I think maybe because you couldn't see you could hear people's voices and
true.
got a sense of people's personalities, and I thought that was
You've
another
reminded
thing.
me.
That's
I've been
interesting
down
about
a
the dark.
mine with Welsh miners. So with Francis Lord.
Yes.
So Francis and I were managing this big public art project at Combe Down, just outside Bath, and it was where they had to stabilise the old stone mines because they're underneath the village there, and the whole lot was collapsing. It was ridiculous. It was 80% void. It was mad. And the people doing the actual work were mainly miners from the valleys because they had all that heritage and mining skills. And we were so lucky to go down there with them and talk to them while they were working. And again, that was a very intimate experience because it's some of the spaces were quite big. It wasn't all that claustrophobic, but they did at times say, right, we're going to put the lights out now just so you can experience the dark. But also they really look after each other, you know, and as soon as you're down underground, you're one of them. It doesn't matter where you're from, you're part of the family. You know, and that was fantastic.
That's really interesting. Mining and woods in
Yes.
one.
Well, you know, and they
the dark,
have, I mean,
another
their
side of the
tradition
dark.
of singing. I mean, they did sing down there. It was amazing.
Oh, wow. Great. Well, thank you, Steve. That's great.
My pleasure. Right.